On our travels that we do get to go to quite a few different places, and today we've called in at Highley Station. I've always felt for years that this has been a really modelable location. It's quite a relatively small rural station. It doesn't have sort of like traditional features such as a goods shed or whatever, but it's really useful because it's a nice passing station as well.
I think when you say traditional features like goods shed, they tend to be traditional modelling features, not necessarily what the prototype had. That's the key with this, is that this is a nicely preserved station with all the facilities that you would expect, but none of the ones that perhaps we would tend to put on because we like them as modellers, but wouldn't have actually been there in real life.
So we're going to take a look at a few of the details that are here, and maybe how you can get a bit of a leg up from the manufacturers on some of the items that they've got.
And don't forget, a lot of these details are applicable to all sorts of branch line railways, and so you can pinch the ideas and use them on your own layout. When I visit a preserved railway, I must admit, obviously I look at the stations and the signal boxes and all the really interesting railway stuff, but I do like it when they've got to the stage of being able to build interesting areas or use interesting buildings. And this is a great little scene here that would look fantastic on a layout, and certainly is very much the sort of thing I like to build models of. Now, I'll be honest, I know nothing about the history of this group of buildings, but I don't care. I think I'd like to build them. So you've got a small flat roofed with a slope on it brick building in there. I'm guessing some sort of office, and I have a feeling it might be associated with the cattle dock next door. A brick yard, which at the moment has got a dump truck sat in it. Quite an old dump truck because it's got a Petter stationary engine powering it. So this is classic dump truck territory. But behind it, we've got a corrugated iron building. Now, wiggly tin was a big favourite of a lot of the railway companies, and certainly for that sort of 1930s on period, if you haven't got some on your layout, then you're missing out. And this barrel-roofed building type was very, very common. Great Western absolutely loved it. There's lamp huts and all sorts around here. LMS did the same sort of thing. And they built these stores, which might term provender stores because we're out in the country, and you'll store foodstuffs and perishables in there. There's not a proper goods shed on this site, but that's probably because they just didn't ship enough material out, but they still needed a store. So you've got this nice little store, classic Great Western livery colours as well, but you'll notice they've faded quite badly out in the sunshine. So if you're sitting there going, I must find the right paint, truth is, something approximating that, and looking at the brown that's gone quite pinky, that will look much more realistic on your layout than having absolutely brand spanking new colours everywhere. What you do see is though, it's not particularly rusty, and you've also got the attractive sign on the top, which is another reason I think it's a provender store, because that will be the guy who owns that'll be the business that owns this particular building. But anyway, nice simple scene. It's not very big, but it's the sort of thing that could while away a couple of weeks worth of evenings, just building the detail in the corner of the layout, fill up a corner and really give that a bit of life. Okay, Andy, so we've moved over here to the cattle dock area, and this is unusual in that it's a preserved cattle dock, but it's also a very small cattle dock, but there's still a lot we can learn from a modelling point of view, I think.
Yeah, as you say, I mean, it's a typical rural village cattle dock, just a couple of pens, not very big, as you say.
No, and they were a classic feature of any rural station, because movement of animals was really important on the railways until the sort of late 50s, I think it was.
Yeah, and certainly when you've not got many cattle actually going out, that your cattle wagons would have been in the pickup goods service, and then obviously taken onwards and probably combined with other services.
And of course, not just cattle, because sheep, I believe, will move this way, and horses if you've got a race course nearby or stuff is going to a race course. But I mean, obviously, the horses are rather better looked after than the cattle in this state. But there's still welfare considerations. We've got a trough in here for drinking water, so there'll be drinking water provided at all times. The brick base here presumably provides a little bit of traction for the hooves of the cattle. But some cattle docks had ridged floors. And I know from years and years ago when I worked for the Minister of Agriculture, the cattle facilities were inspected on a regular basis, because I found in an old file that an inspection of a cattle area, which was fascinating from that point of view. So you know, these things had rules, and therefore you've really got to look up the prototype to make sure you get it right.
Little things like the gates being hinged outwards, same on the platform side, that it hinges outwards so that your beasts don't fall down the gap or escape as you're trying to load up. And the same as well when you're trying to put them into a trailer or
It's
whatever.
a lot easier if you can funnel them around. These animals are surprisingly easy to move, but you do need to constrain them.
Particularly sheep, yeah.
Yes.
Now, I know of another cattle dock that's been unearthed over the last 2 or 3 years, and that's over in Welshpool. And it's where the Welshpool and Llanfair came down and met the standard gauge at Welshpool Station in the old cattle market area. So on one side of the platforms, that you've still got intact, embedded in the concrete, mixed gauge track work with the narrow gauge and standard gauge there. But there's enough still to see there with concrete posts and so on, and the hinge work, that you could see a different, much larger type of cattle dock where stuff became concentrated towards the market.
Yeah, and that makes them, I say, it makes them ideal for modelling, doesn't it? Because certainly from the point of view of building a 4mm model or a 2mm model, I believe Ratio do cattle docks in those scales. But this is a tiny catalogue. This is not what they. This is not what they. So you could end up scratch building it. You are only going to need some. You're going to need some fencing. You're going to need to build a platform, and most importantly, you're going to need cattle wagons. And there's plenty of options there. Oxford Rail do them. Hornby do them. I think there's some in the Backman range. Of course, there's various kits for them, such as Parkside, and Airfix, of course.
Yeah.
Can't forget the classic Airfix ones.
Yeah. The actual posts. I mean, you only need about 1.5mm square plastic strut in 4mm scale to start then drilling it out and using wires, make your own configuration.
Yes, but drilling it out is challenging. Again, worth looking at that because they're obviously intending sheep to be in here. The bottom 4 rungs are very close together. By the time you get to cow height, they're wider spaced.
Yeah.
Because obviously you want to keep the little devils inside there. You do not want them roaming around. And there is another important consideration if you're building cattle docks on your layout: dung.
Really?
Yes, because what goes in must come out, and you've got to do something with it.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's also considerations of how you deal with the manure. Now, small amounts, Station Garden can deal with it. Perhaps the staff will take it away for their garden. If you've got a more expansive area, you've got a big cattle dock, certainly if you're a market town, there are tons and tons of this stuff to consider. So you're going to have to start piling it up somewhere on the layout.
So, practical Phil, what are your top tips for making dung?
Making dung. Well, you've got to look at dung and bear in mind that most of it is straw. So a good base is beige static fibres for static grass.
You've looked into this, haven't you?
I have, yes. You've got to, and then you need something brownish to work with as well. Now, actually, brown scatter would work quite nicely. Just mix it up with the straw colour, and you've got a good basis. However, dung varies depending on the colour it is, how fresh. It depends on how fresh it is. So you may want to consider your time as well. There's an awful lot to it, and best of all, if you want a really entertaining cameo scene, fresh dung is quite warm, and so you will find people standing in it just to keep their wellies nice and warm. Nice little cameo in the corner of the layout.
He's gone all too fine scale about this dung.
So go on, Andy. I'm looking at this ground signal here. Well, I'm assuming it's a ground signal. It looks like a ground signal to me. It just seems tall.
Yeah, it's not on the ground. Obviously, it's elevated on the tubular pole that we've got there. That was actually controlling the access into the quarry sidings down here, where the engine house now is. Well, between obviously the quarry sidings and then back onto the main line down there. But as you rightly queried, why is it high up? And that's for sighting reasons, because the whole of the site's on a bit of a curve, and the view of it would have been blocked for the driver by things such as the cattle dock down here.
You're right, the cattle dock, the water tower, they're all in the way of the driver, because if that was on the ground there, it'd even be tucked behind a point lever.
Yeah.
So it would be quite an easy one to miss. But I mean, the pole itself, it must be what, 10 feet, it's raised at about 10 feet in the air. You've got a ladder attached to it, but it is still a conventional ground signal, the sort of thing that you would get from Ratio or Wizard models.
Yeah, you're going to have to use components or elements from different things to achieve something like that, you're not going to get one of those straight out of the box.
No, there's definitely work to be done, but it's not rocket science. I mean, we are just talking a pole underneath it and a little bit of work. Interestingly, in a slightly nerdy way, I noticed that the wire that operates it actually goes away from us, back under the track, along the other side of the railway, and then must cross over back to the signal box.
Oh, this is the thing with, I mean, obviously we've got DCC Concepts bringing out working point rodding and so on. It's a bit of a black art how to actually plan this. And you need a signalling engineer. Even, I mean, in the modern day, we've got people like Simon Paley who's written some material for us, and he's publishing a book on it. He's about planning for signalling. It's another thing altogether. But I suppose it's a case of model what you see.
It's the benefit of modelling a prototype location, isn't it? Because you can come along to here, and Highley is a very modelable station. You can come along here and look to see where everything is and learn from that. I mean, certainly I wouldn't have thought to stick a ground signal on a pole.
No.
But that's how it is, and it certainly makes for a much more interesting little detail for a layout. Question: how did the porter cross the railway? I'm not joking. What he did was he used a barra crossing. Now, I should say before I start, I am standing in the middle of the railway at the Severn Valley, but they have given us permission, and we are on a non-running day today. But if anybody sees a train coming up behind me, can you all shout, please? Right, we're at Highley Station, and we are looking at a really classic barra crossing. This is another really essential feature of any model railway. Certainly, if you're expecting people with trolleys to get from one side of the tracks to the other, they aren't going over the footbridge and bumping a parcels trolley with heavy goods on it over the tracks. That isn't going to happen either. What you've got here is a series of old sleepers, although they don't appear to have many holes in them, so they probably are fresh sleepers that have been laid between the tracks, allowing space here for the flangeway. And in modelling terms, this is our biggest problem. But you've got them laid out there, straight from one side to the other, gates at opposite ends to keep people from randomly wandering around the tracks like I am doing here. And they've all weathered in quite nicely. Now, these are obviously not originals, these have been replaced, otherwise they'd have gone well rotten by now. But they would be replaced on a regular basis and creosoted so that they stayed in one place. Interesting touch, we've got boards nailed on the ends of them, presumably to keep the sleepers from moving, because obviously you've got heavy trains passing over and that will shake the track. And also it just stops the ballast from heading underneath them as well. So from a modelling point of view, card, there are plastic kit versions of these. Wood can be used if you use a nice close grain wood. If you've got some leftover sleeper material, it's worth looking at using that as well. But I say, the crucial thing is when you build your model is to make sure that there is space here for the flanges of your locos and wagons. And in 00, that means they're actually going to be quite wide gaps. And the other thing is, make sure the top surface of the barra crossing is below the level of the rails. Now, in real life, you want it as flush as possible, but in modelling terms, you want it slightly below the level of the top of the rail so that you can clean the track. Something the real railway doesn't have to do with a great big track rubber. Apart from that, it's actually a really nice simple thing to model. Adds a bit of character to your station. And final handy hint: were you to have a baseboard joint along here, the barra crossing would hide that joint really nicely. So that makes them an excellent useful modelling feature.
As Phil said, that we've been given a bit of free rein today to look at some different things. One of the things I like about Highley Station is the slight change in levels. So it's not flat earth this, that by the platform that you've got the lowest level, the loop here is a little bit higher, and then the siding in which I'm standing in the 4-foot is higher once again. And this is about 18 inches higher than over there. Subtle little details which, if included in the model, can make quite a difference to it.
Well, this is a pretty classic signal box, the one at Highley. And in fact,
because it's actually been around quite a bit, hasn't it, this one?
I mean, this is a signal box that's been, I believe, Yeah, this is probably the archetypal Great Western signal box, available in kit form from Ratio and as a ready built building from Bachmann.
Bachmann did one in the Scenecraft range along with the rest of the Highley buildings a few years ago.
Yeah, but a great choice because you can sit this absolutely anywhere. It's about the right size for the station, and this station is about the sort of size most people's branch line stations tend to be. So, it works very nicely for modelers.
But I think something to take into account here is the siting of the signal box. It's opposite the station building, but it's here for a reason, and that is, you can see down the line that way, back down towards Bewdley, and off around the sidings on the way up to Bridgenall.
Yeah, it's sort of on the apex of the curve, which actually makes it harder for the railway itself because all the rodding is on the far side of the rail. So all the controls go out of here under the railway and then onto the far side because that's where they're more convenient. But of course, the box itself needs to be where the signalman can see things.
Yeah. There's a lot of details actually on here as well, so you can go beyond the basic kit or the Scenecraft product. So I mean, looking down there, first of all, buckets.
Fire buckets, very, very important.
Yeah. So not just water but sand as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, and they're all hung there nice, because of course they are painted bright red. They're a nice little scenic addition to any model because they catch the eye, and little bits of red detail really make a difference on a model.
Now you've done a lot of signal box interior detailing before, but as I say, there's more external ones because you actually think, obviously, that the signalman's obviously got a nice coal stove in there burning away. But I've spotted down there's an oil drum.
Right, but they used oil for lots of things. Don't forget, all the lamps would be oil powered.
Yeah, because he's got to go off and do that around the station as well.
And he's going to need to lubricate his bike.
Yeah.
And indeed, lots of things need lubrication because we tend to forget that the bit below us is full of rods and levers and interlocking and all those clever mechanical bits, which of course we don't need to model.
Yeah.
But they are really there.
Yeah.
And not only has the signalman got to have coal for his fire, and coal was common enough on the railway, on the steam railway. That's not a problem. Yeah. There's usually facilities for the signalman to relieve himself. Now, I guess the station is only over there, so there's nothing up here. I'm looking at the signal box, can't see any facilities up here. But actually, often on signal boxes, there was another little box at this end of the balcony with toilet facilities in.
A little bit unusual for, you don't see it on models very often, but we've actually got track work on both sides of the box here. That we've got the main line and the loops, but we've also got a good siding on the other side as well.
A good siding with a loading gauge, of course, and the loading gauge being essential for checking things, so you didn't scrape it along the top of a bridge or tunnel.
Yeah.
And again, loading gauges tend to be quite specific for different companies, so there are different patterns, although they all basically did the same job. This one's interesting because of the angles at the ends of it.
Yeah, they turn up really quite sharply, don't they?
Yeah, and I think they can actually be raised and lowered. I think that's the point of them. If you look, there's a set of pulleys up there, so you can raise and lower them. Again, it's a prototype feature worth keeping an eye open for. And the other thing is, it's actually very spindly. Yeah. Plastic loading gauges do tend to be on the chunky side, but they look fine and they do the job. And it's more important to have that probably than not to have one at all. But if you want to finesse your layout, you'll be putting those sort of things in the same way as with the signal box. You're going to make sure you've got the finials on the roof, all the chimneys, all the bits sticking out there. You're going to start thinking about if the point rodding is going under a road, as it is here, you've got the ability to get at the point rodding. It's not tarmacked over. There's concrete slabs that can be lifted if required, and you've got. I mean, you're going to have to build this whole little area around the signal box and have a look at it. But signalling is one of those topics that people do really, really get into.
I certainly do, but also as well, a little like offshoot from that, there's a couple of us in the editorial team that are members of the Telegraph Pole Appreciation Society. So obviously what we've got out here, I noticed that the poles and wires actually go off that way around rather than close up to the railway. So they go around the edge of the railway property and then come back towards the line.
And cross over because I can see poles from here. The telegraph being an essential part of the whole railway system. And again, something that we often tend to ignore, but telegraph poles are very, very important to the overall scene of a railway.
And it's one of the things that was in one of our recent articles on that as well, that you've got to put your poles the right way round. So, I mean, obviously, yeah, your pole sticks up, but then you've got the cross arms for supporting the insulators, and all of those cross arms are on the upside of the telegraph poles. Now, you see, people, they do put milepost markers onto layouts, but I wonder how many people put the right mileage on. 143 1/4 of a mile from Paddington.